Yeah, so as I mentioned, I wasn't able to make it here last week because of illness, where we talked about 12.0. So I wanted to bring that up again. We've got, we're supposed to have a general direction of things we want to do in 12.0 by the first. Today's the first, but it doesn't necessarily have to be finalized until the kickoff meeting on the 8th. So I wanted to quickly look through the board. And so the board is linked there in the agenda item. It feels like there's a lot on here. And unfortunately, this is my first time doing planning without Victor. And so, Sean, thanks for your comments. It looks like we're a little bit oversubscribed, and so we need to cut some things. I don't know if there's things that are easy targets to cut, but I wanted to at least have a discussion on it because this is my first time, and you all have much more historical context than I do.
Yeah, so last time I looked at the list, but what I missed was, so I was searching by feature, and what I missed was that a few of the features didn't have the label feature, which
Yeah.
included some big ones. So I think that's probably where we should start looking at. So we've got a value stream analytics item, which is potentially moving to manage. There's a merge request about that, but I don't think we should make that affect this planning too much. There is manual backlog grooming and prioritization. And those are the two big ones, I would say. I would say of those two, we can probably only do one, like regardless of like, the other capacity issue that we have. So I would love to do manual backlog grooming and prioritization because it would be super useful for us. I wasn't actually aware it was ready, but it does say UX ready. So, if it is, we should go for it.
Yeah, so VSM's issue did not have the feature label. I noticed that as I was watching the recording last week. And so I added it. So it now shows up on that list when you filter by feature. I do think it's something with the proposal to move VSM to manage and to consolidate our analytics story. I think that we should definitely prioritize the manual backlog grooming over this issue. And so what do you think makes most sense, Sean? Is it to move this to 12.1 or is this to drop the milestone and move it to backlog?
My preference, just because I'm lazy, is that if we think we want to talk about this again in future, it's easier to move it to the next milestone. I don't think, the problem with bumping things along milestones is sort of the public image it sends, but I think there's not a huge amount of participants in that issue. So it's probably pretty clear, like, if we just say like we're moving this to 12.1 because we can't do it in 12.0, but we don't want to forget about it. That's the easier. For me personally, like that's how I manage like some technical debt issues as well. Like I will put them on a future milestone, and then if it turns out we don't have capacity in that milestone, I'll bump them out, but to another future milestone so we don't forget them entirely. And then also we get if we just bumped it 5 milestones in a row thing in the merger in the issue, then that's probably a sign that we don't actually care about it that much. So that's my general preference.
Okay, so we'll push that one out. I just changed the milestone to 12.1. And then for manual backlog grooming, which I think is useful for a bunch of people, and we have the internal customer label on that one as well. We'll keep that one for 12.0. How does that impact our weight, John? Just moving that one out, does that get us to a happy spot, or do we need to trim more?
That was weight 5, so we need to trim more, but I think we can trim holistically. Like, we could probably trim some bugs of the ones that are lower priority on there. We could probably trim some technical debt that's lower priority, some features that are lower priority, stuff like that. So I think the trimming in general, like I don't want to cut too much off the top. I would rather cut from like the bottom of like, what's the lowest priority bug that we're doing? Can we move that out? What's the lowest priority tech debt issue that we're doing? Can we move that out? Because that actually goes quite well with the issue we're just talking about with the manual backlog grooming and prioritization. If you just have a single list, then you can just cut the line, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because I'm asking to like add something in that, Eric Johnson has asked for, which is the board list capacity line, which if anyone went to the engineering group conversation, you'd know that that's kind of how the engineering leaders are managing their own work in product, we're doing the same thing. We have a board for all of our product leadership items, and we're just drawing a manual line. So this would be really useful. And so we can talk about that later. But just so I'm clear, it sounds like we have a capacity of 75 weight for 12.0. What was our weight for 11.11?
So just first of all, that's for backend. Second of all, for 11.11, it was I don't remember the exact number. I had it written down earlier. It was 100 and something, like 120 or something like that. But we've got like a big impact from contribute. We've got a big impact from Jan not working on plan and Mario not working on plan. So that's the main issue. We do have someone else starting next week on the back end team, but obviously it'll take them a while to get up to speed, especially given that their first week's at contribute. So yeah,
sure.
Donald, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at front end capacity, if it's a similar story or if it's different.
Sorry, I was going through the switch right as you said.
Oh, yeah, I was just asking about front end capacity, if you've had a chance to look yet, or if you have a sort of idea of like, are we way over in 12.0 at the moment? Are we about right? What's...
Oh man, I'm going. Sorry. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Are you having AirPod issues? I have them occasionally with Zoom.
Where my sound is coming from. All right. I still need to wait a couple of the front end issues in 12.0. But as far as we calculated how many we did in 11.11 so far. It looks like so far we're around on the front end only at 31. We typically get around 11.10. We got 50 done. With contribute, with 3 front end engineers going, weight should be, I don't know, I'm guessing around 40, 45 for 12.0. Like I said, I still need to wait out a couple of the ones in 12.0, but looking at what was weighted just front end, we're at 43 right now. So there's probably a few we're going to have to take out on the front end only issues also.
Okay. And on this one we were talking about, which sounds like it would be kind of a headline feature about the manual backlog grooming and prioritization, I think that's more front end than it is back end, because for back end, we already have the ability to order issues on a board. And this is just basically ordering issues, not on a board. So I think there is some back end work there, but I think the majority of it is front end. So I'll let you sort of go into that in detail after this call and figure out like if we should be able to do that or not.
Perfect. That sounds good.
Okay, so that was all I wanted to talk about for 12.0. I can work asynchronously after this meeting to kind of continue to train, and Sean and Donald, I'll obviously need your input there. But unless there's more to do synchronously with the team, I think we can move on for 12.0. Does that make sense?
Yep, and I know we're going to go on to this next, but if we want to add stuff after, I think it's probably best to like do it and trim, and then potentially add these things that we're talking about, but do those as swaps. So, you know, we've got the capacity sorted and then we exchange things, I think is the easiest sort of model there.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. I have the next agenda item 2 then. So let's move on. There's 3 things that have popped up that, you know, since I've taken over for Victor, there's 3 things that have popped up in the past week, and I just wanted to get the team's thoughts on them. The first one is instance level epics, which is directly from a large customer. It's basically asking for what I would say is almost like a program management view of various departments within their GitLab instance. This is definitely by no means, I almost put like WIP like on the front of this issue. If that was a thing, like this would be like a WIP issue. Because I'm not sure if this is a good idea. I think there's other ways to potentially solve for this, but I think that it's interesting. And we also have this issue called group level things. Like the issue is called group level things. And I almost thought of maybe there needs to be an issue called instance level things, where we expose functionality and features at the instance level. And so I just threw this here. We don't necessarily need to discuss it synchronously on the call, but I wanted to make everyone aware of this issue that I created yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not going to read my whole comment here, but I am going to sort of just outline sort of how I was thinking about this. So one way you could model this in GitLab right now is the exact situation they have at the moment, but with every group they have per department in the company inside one top level group. So you've got your instance, you've got a single top level group for the entire company, and then everything inside that. And then epics can be created at the top level. They will work, et cetera, et cetera. You know, group boards will work there, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think asking people to do that is necessarily a great fit, because it sort of defeats the point of having top level groups if our recommendation is only have one per instance. Also, it doesn't work for us at GitLab, because we have a bunch of top level groups, most notably GitLab org, GitLab.com, and also the charts repository we have for our Helm charts and stuff. So the idea I had, which needs more thought, is that you could have a way to create a group. So actually, let me rewind a bit. So the way it works right now is for a label, a group milestone, an epic, or a group board, things flow down the groups. So you can have a parent group, you can have child group, subgroups, and subgroups can use labels from parent groups. Epics can contain issues from child groups. Group boards show you issues from subgroups as well. So the problem here is that top level groups don't have a parent, but I thought maybe it's possible to create another group that could have top level groups as its children, but not have regular children and not do the membership access inheritance flowing down thing that happens right now. So for instance, at GitLab, we have some groups that are at the top level because we don't want everybody at GitLab to be able to access that group. And if you have access to GitLab.com, if you create a subgroup in there, anybody who has access, you get the highest of whatever your access is on all these groups, right? And if you've got high access on the parent group, you will have it all the way down. So I think that would also potentially help with that problem. Now, that's obviously got a bunch of issues. I've listed some of them there. One I just thought about right now was on GitLab.com specifically, would we ask people to pay for 2 groups to get this feature? Because like you pay per user in your group, right? So that's a problem as well. But that's the way I was thinking about it, because I think instance level works fine for single tenant instances, but it doesn't really work for multi-tenant like GitLab.com. And it would be great if we could solve this for ourselves at the same time, because we have this issue where we have our website repository in the GitLab.com group and our application source code in the GitLab org group, for instance. And if people are working on both of those things, they can't show up on the same issue board because they're not in the same parent group.
Right.
So that's what I was thinking. There are other ways we could potentially solve it, but I think that one sort of probably works best for all the planned stuff at least. But I don't know about other stage groups and whether that makes sense at all. And we definitely need some feedback from Manage, which I asked for as well.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, one of the things I want to make sure we don't get into is having our end users basically having to get a PhD in how GitLab groups and subgroups and projects work hierarchically, just in order to get the thing to work how they need it to work from a permissions and visibility perspective. And so that's one of the biggest complaints that other project management tools have out there is like you have to like literally understand a second query language or like a second workflow engine just to understand and get your thing to work within the tool. And so
yeah, what was the term you used earlier? Sorry, like when you were introducing this issue initially, when you were saying like we need a sort of like instance level whatever section. I can go back and watch the recording later, but I'm trying to remember what the specific term you used was. It was something management, I think.
Program management.
Program management. Yeah, so we could even call these groups like program management groups or something like that, maybe to make it clearer. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it, but well, yeah.
But typically program management is a middle level in the hierarchy. So group today maps almost perfectly to what, and I'm writing the IDC response right now and I'm calling groups program management.
Okay.
portfolio would be the thing at the top of it, making investment decisions as to what things we're going to work on later on. So hierarchically, it would be portfolio, program, project. And so I don't know. I'm scratching my head on this one because I, at least Sean, my thoughts on your answer that says, if that's what you want, then put everything underneath the top level group and you have all the functionality you want. It's there. I mean, I don't understand, and the description, I haven't read through your comments in detail. You wrote a lot. But it seems to me that we're just labeling it something different at the top level instance level and move on. You know what I mean? I don't know. I've got to read through it in detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read through, I agree with Eric. And I agree with Eric too. You don't want people to have to have a PhD in GitLab to use GitLab.
Yeah. So I would recommend, just in the essence of time, and we have a bunch of other agenda items, let's just communicate asynchronously on this one. I'm not looking to schedule this, this release, so it's okay for it to be a little bit fuzzy right now, but I would welcome your comments there.
Okay.
Let's move on to the second one I have in the list. So this one I would like to activate on sooner rather than later. So board list capacity line. This is kind of like what I would call an MVC of what was originally written down as like managing board capacity. And so there's another issue which outlines like a number of various proposals on how to manage board capacity. This is an incredibly pared down version that just says, like, just give me a line or the ability to make like a UI element where issues can be above and below a line that can be dragged and dropped. And Sean, you had a question. I responded to it. The answer is 100% option 2 in your issue comment there. I don't want this line to have like hidden functionality with respect to capacity management. I just want the user to be able to drag and drop things above and below it and for them to manage it. And so the ask would be, is this in a place where we could potentially get this scheduled for 12.0 as a swap, or do we need more UX work to run a sprint ahead and then schedule this for 12.1? So I wanted to bring that up since this is my first time going through this process with this team.
I think we need ordering done prior to this, right? Sean, what do you think?
So this one's about boards, and the other one's about, so you can already order on boards, and the other one's about ordering on a list view. So they are not. People wouldn't necessarily be stepping on each other's toes if they were working on these two together. I think. Is that right, Eric? Sorry, that the line goes in the board, because I think it would make sense.
The line goes in the board.
It would also make sense for the line to go in the backlog view we're talking about in the other issue, but I guess we can add that later.
Yes, that's not what this is for, though. This is specifically for boards.
Okay.
Are we talking about automatically adding a line based on what the weight is, or
No.
just, so somehow we will need some sort of UX work to, like, a button that says add a line and then you drag it around, I guess.
Correct.
I agree, Annabelle. I think we need to look into this a bit.
Yeah, there's one thing I have outstanding. I'm going to post an issue comment right now. And I guess it's more of a question, which is, should we also allow for naming of the line? And then subsequent actions like an edit of a name. Should we allow multiple lines? I would say for an MVC, we should just allow like one line per list. But wanted to get the team's thoughts on that as well.
When we first added boards, we had one board per project and you couldn't name it. So I think that maps pretty well to that as well.
Cool. All right, well, I'm going to make a decision and just say, or in a issue comment, just say, for this MVC, we will not allow naming of the line nor multiple lines per list.
I have a question. I haven't actually read through the whole issue yet, but is this, how is this different than creating multiple boards for different releases? Like, what is the line signifying that it probably won't get done if you're below this line?
Yeah.
So would that not be on a separate issue board? Like if you create a 12.0 issue board with all your issues and then you create 12.1 with all those?
So the only thing there is there's a use case where someone wants to see like what won't get done on the same list. Like they want to be cognizant of what's behind the capacity of the team and just be able to visually see that on the same board.
Okay.
So I think the way we can think about this is the conversation we just had before about like how much weight was on 12.0. If we imagine for a second these worked with weight, which is a future iteration, like we could have that list of issues, and we could say, well, the lines, we could say, well, the line for engineering is here, so Eric can then see, well, I need to move stuff above and below that line, and then take everything below that line, and then when we start implementing, that goes into a different milestone. But it's useful for the point before that, where you're actually trying to figure out what you're going to be able to take at all in the milestone.
This makes a lot of sense if we can imagine, when we talk about imagining the line where it's set based upon the weight or the count of the things above it, such that the line is either 5 issues or a weight of 10. Either or, the line will move around based on that. That would be where this gets to be really interesting.
Yes, that's the second issue I think that Eric's extracted this from to like create the MVC.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Eric, is there anything, like any product out there that does this currently?
I don't know the answer to that, Alexis. I do know that like one of the best use cases I've seen for this one modeled is like Eric Johnston and his engineering leadership board, where he's like literally created a dummy issue that the title of the issue is called The Line, and it's a bunch of dashes, and he's using that issue to essentially create his own line, which I think is an interesting use case of like the small primitive, like if you're using an issue for this, but it's also like not super ideal.
Cool, I need to check that out.
Yeah, I'll try to find that board. And if you go back and watch the group conversation, he actually like shares his screen in this one. Because we talk about dog fooding. I asked him a question about dog fooding and how I think the question I asked was, what are you most excited about, to dog food in GitLab that you kind of can't today? And he gives an answer, and then he's like, but here's like another example of something that we are dog fooding, but it's not a great experience. And he shares his screen. So I have to find the board link, and I'll do that, and I'll put that in this issue.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's move on. So I would like to understand if we can do this in 12.0. So Annabelle, I guess it sounds like you have some outstanding questions. I don't know if we can just work in the issue on this one.
We can work in the issue. I'd like to make it, a clean experience. So it's not like a random button that's like add a line, or I don't know. That's a little awkward. So, and with the summit contribute coming up, I don't want to rush it. Like we need to do design and development in the same milestone where half the team's going to be out.
Yeah, I understand. So I know this is a new one. I will, what is not completely clear to me right now is like the sequencing of events for this team. And once again, I apologize for kind of coming in late, but the sequencing of like, design work and then that funneling into backend, that needs to happen across 2 releases. If that can sometimes happen in 1 release, I'll lean on y'all to help guide me and figure that out.
Yeah, ideally typically, unless it's something that requires just a small amount of UX, we like to work a release ahead.
Sure.
So if we can slot this one in, if that's okay, if we can slot this one in for 12.0 on the UX side, and then just plan on doing the active development 12.1, that would be the preferred path. If that doesn't work as far as timelines, we possibly can make it work all in the same release.
Yeah, also like in general, I feel like we try to just do stuff asynchronously throughout the milestone anyway. So not necessarily like, UX, can you drop everything and look at this? But UX, can you look at this? Like obviously we couldn't do that in this case, but you know what I mean? Like if we could have said to Annabelle and Alexis, like, can you look at this a couple of weeks ago? Maybe it doesn't need maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't need like as much UX attention if they can answer those questions, or maybe it does, but they'll be in a better place to answer that the earlier we can ask the questions. So it's not necessarily about a release ahead. It's more about just like, get the question out as soon as possible, and then they can sort of manage it with their other tasks.
Cool. I'm going to go ahead and just skip the next item under 2, and then we can move on to number 3.
Sorry, so it's up to me now?
Yeah, that's you. Sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to let the team know that the UX team is doing this UX audit to make sure that our website will get GitLab as accessible as possible. And we started with color, checking the contrast and making sure that none of our elements are using only color to convey a meaning. And across GitLab, we do that a lot. So we're trying to fix these. So Alexis and I have gone through and identified all the places within Plan that we have these sort of UX issues, and we will be working over the next few releases. I don't know how many releases this is supposed to span, but we're going to be adding a few issues into each milestone. And these are mostly UX issues, I believe, like, darkening colors and making sure contrast is where it needs to be. But that will affect the UX capacity for the next few releases. This is something that we were supposed to work with Victor on, but he's not here. So we're not really sure how to plan right now. So I just wanted to give the team a heads up.
Annabelle, when you say work with Victor on, what does that look like? What does that mean? How can I help there?
We were told so we created all these issues and we identified solutions for as many as possible. If they were small enough, some require a lot more work. And then we were just kind of told to work with our PM to schedule these issues. I still need to find out a little bit more about what that means and how long, when we're supposed to have everything finished, because that would help a lot. And then based on the capacity that we already have for each upcoming milestone, figure out which issues UX could start working on along with all of the actual features that we're currently still working on. So right now, I don't think there's anything to do. I need to get more clarity on scheduling.
Okay. Feel free to reach out to me if you need help there, if there's anything I can do.
Great, thanks. On to Donald.
Yeah, so I realized I failed and forgot to invite him to this meeting. Sorry. So let's move this to next week. But welcome, we have a new front-end engineer, Martin.
He could watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, that's true.
And then he could record his own YouTube video introducing himself.
Yeah, there you go. But I'll move it to next week. But yeah, new front-end engineer. Yay.
Cool. Annabelle, do you want to take Pedro's item?
Yeah. I saw this yesterday. Okay, Pedro has moved permanently to the Create team. So we will have an opening for another Plan UX designer, I assume, because now Create has 3 and Plan used to have 3. He's doing this because I can provide the historical UX background of GitLab in a Plan, and there isn't anyone in Create for that because the other 2 designers are very new. And he's still going to help contribute to Plan because they are sibling stages. I haven't heard of that. That makes sense. Yeah, that's about it. On to Sean.
Yeah, so I thought this would be a good point to check in with Kushal and Brett. So Brett's not on the call, but I did speak to him about this bit yesterday because we decided to implement the Epic tree view in Epics in GraphQL from the start. From the backend perspective, it's kind of hard to answer this question right now because we had to do a bunch of setup work, which we knew we would for this issue because we didn't have, for instance, the concept of a group or an epic in GraphQL before this. And next time we try and implement an epics feature in GraphQL, we won't have to implement those again because the whole point is we've just done that. But it seems to have gone okay so far. I don't think there are any major issues. Kushal, I think you're still on the call. I was wondering if you could speak how it felt from the front end.
Yeah, so as far as front-end implementation is concerned, it was rather easy to work with, especially that. So most of the times when we work with backend API for any front-end app, you would have to deal with different structure of key names in raw JSON response that we receive. That isn't the case because with GraphQL, it is predictable how the structure of response would be. So you wouldn't have to parse much. The data that you want in a certain structure is what you mention in the graph query itself. And that's what you get. So it is easier to work in that way. But at the same time, what I understand how GraphQL is beneficial for any front-end development is that any particular API key or item that you need in response, you just go ahead and update the query and it is readily available. I think that doesn't work directly in our case. And that is something that I discussed with Bob today afternoon as well, is because that all the data that we are querying via GraphQL requires to go through the Rails controllers and helpers, just to make sure that all the privileges are in place. So for example, if I would need a certain key or a certain property in an object to be present while querying the data, if it isn't supported, then I cannot just go ahead and update the query and expect it to be available. I would have to make sure that the backend has implemented it correctly. And in case the query fails, I would let Brett know that this is something that we need from the backend. So in a way, it is still similar to what we had earlier with the traditional APIs, where any change that we would need in the response, we would communicate it with the backend developer instead of us as a front-end engineers directly go ahead and update the query. So that is the only missing part. But I think it is still very initial stage of GraphQL support within GitLab. I think once we reach to the point where it is widely available across the app, it should be much easier to work on any query without having any backend developer manually intervene and make sure that the data is available in the response.
Cool. That's pretty much matches up with what Brett was saying as well. So just to sort of ask you a hypothetical question, which I didn't prepare you for, if we were to implement another Epix feature using this GraphQL API, do you think that would be quicker now that we've done this work, assuming that this was merged, which it isn't at the moment because we're still working on it?
Yes, because right now GraphQL is being used only for the tree tab. So the MR that you've linked, it currently adds tree tab to the page body of Epix. And we are not using that same response for the other tabs or for the page body for that matter. But if we were to move that entire GraphQL querying part to the root page itself, like if we were to get the data on the page load itself, then we don't have to make any additional queries for the rendering of the page because all the data is available on the page load itself. Having said that, what we can do in the next release or in next couple of releases without doing a major refactor is that for both the tabs, the roadmap as well as tree tab, we can leverage the same network request that we are making. And we can reuse that response to render both the roadmap page as well as roadmap tab as well as the tree tab. Because right now there would be two different requests to fetch the data for the Epix, one for the roadmap and one for the tree. But since this MR is already adding a lot of front-end and back-end code to just get this tree tab running, adding another MR just to make sure that roadmap also uses the same query would be too much for the release. So I would definitely open a technical debt issue just to save on one additional query because we don't want to again query exact same data if user switches the tab. Although the request happens only once when you click on the tab for the first time. After that, any tab switching doesn't involve any querying. But since we are already querying the data, why not query it on page load and then use that response for both tree as well as the roadmap?
Yeah, I think we actually have an issue already open about that for the roadmap because I think Heinrich created an issue that said that we're just like sending way too much data for the front end for the roadmap, like it doesn't need it, and we said we'd just like postpone that until we had GraphQL implemented here because then the front end could just request the data it needed instead of like having to ask the back end for a generic thing and then the back end gives it a bunch of stuff it doesn't need. But that's cool. Thank you very much for that summary, Kushal.
I have a question in regards to what Kushal mentioned before, that if we need something else in the front end, we would need to change the structure of the GraphQL query. Is the backend being implemented in a way that it automatically generates the documentation of the model, I mean the API, so that we could check that to see what is available?
No, we have an issue in 12.0 about that.
All right.
Because that's a big missing gap at the moment.
So right now, what I do to test the query whether all the values that I'm looking for are present or not is that I just go to GraphQL page for the instance, and there whenever I type something within the query object, it would autocomplete for me like what are the options available, and that sort of helps a lot just to see like what are the items that are available and whether it already has something that I need or not. So in a way, those things are already there. One thing which I think is missing is that for any property type, right now, the data type of that property's value is defined on the backend. I'm not sure if I'm missing something here. Like if there is any way for me to cast the value type within the query that I am using on the front end, then that should be much helpful, because right now.
Do you have an example of one where you would need to cast it to something else?
So right now, Boolean values are coming in as Boolean, so that is fine. But ID properties. So for example, I have a query for the tree where epics and issues list would have ID property, which needs to be numeric, but the response sends it as string. So I looked at the Apollo GraphQL's docs, whether I can provide data type within my query, and backend would adhere to that data type. I don't think that works from the backend, because the query type that the Ruby files for the query type that we have in the backend already specifies what data type this field needs to be exposed with. So there we have already determined that it needs to be string. So in that case, there isn't a way for me to manually override that type on the front end. Or maybe I'm missing the implementation part of how to deal with the query and pass on the custom data type.
Yeah, I don't actually know the answer to that, but maybe either create an issue or ask in the GraphQL channel in Slack, or create an issue and post it in the GraphQL channel in Slack.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm actually quite surprised the IDs are strings, but I'm sure there is a good reason for that. Cool. Thank you very much for the update, Kushal. That was all we had today. So have a great day, everybody, and I'll speak to you. Well, I actually won't join this meeting next week, because I'll already be flying to New Orleans, but Donald can run it in my absence. Eric, after we stop recording, have you just got like a couple of minutes to answer some question that can't be on YouTube?
Yeah, absolutely.